It's finally time to wrap up the series about how to buy a good used Range Rover, and in case you missed the first few videos, you can click the I up in the corner to go check out the entire playlist. Today though, we're talking all about the inspection report, negotiations, and how to negotiate with the inspection report. Now, as far as inspections go, most service centers will be able to walk you around the car and point out some of the more major concerns. And if there aren't really any major concerns, odds are they'll just give you the report and walk you through it. Now, if they hand you the report, what I would recommend doing is asking them about the concerns they found and going through the inspection sheet with them for just a couple of minutes, just to make sure you have a more clear understanding of what actually came back in the inspection. So take the time to ask about the mechanical parts of the car that you were unsure about before. On top of that, if there were any common problems that you have no service records of being replaced, ask them if they noticed anything, such as front lower control arms being replaced if they were worn out previously. While most reports actually walk you through pretty much everything about the car objectively, you'll get a much better idea if you ask the service advisor his actual opinion of the car and really what they thought. Because the reports are so objective and really just point out mechanical parts, it's hard to really understand if it's actually a good car without just, well, asking. While a more general mechanic may understand the basics of the Range Rover, it's really here more important to get with someone who understands really all of the common problems with all of the different years, who can tell you what you need to do to make sure it's taken care of. Because they work with them so frequently, they'll be able to give you a much better understanding as to whether it's actually in good condition or in poor condition. That's one of the many reasons I don't recommend listening to the inspection report given to you by the dealership, and why I would actually rather go out and have it inspected at a Land Rover dealership or at a specialized mechanic. Obviously though, if the report comes back just completely awful, cut your losses, take the car back, and move on. Before we bought the 7 Series, we took it to another BMW dealership to have them inspect it, and all that came back on the report were two things: a small oil leak, as well as the front lower control arm bushings being worn out. Both of these things are extremely common in the car, so we really didn't think too much about it. But their personal opinion of the car would actually have been a lot nicer and very much so needed in that situation, which would have been, it's awful. Most service centers, if you're paying for an inspection, will take the time to answer some of your questions, and really, that's the most important thing here. This is absolutely your last chance to get your questions answered before you sign on the dotted line, which is such a cliche. I feel like I'm teaching kindergarten here and repeating the same thing over and over about ask questions before you buy, but that's really the most important thing here. So, welcome class. The inspection report that I got on this thing in 2016 from Land Rover Knoxville noted two things that were wrong with the car. Well, wrong with the car. And that included the front lower control arms being worn out, which is extremely common, as well as it needing a brake fluid flush, which at the time I had no idea what that meant. I was completely new to the cars. I didn't know how much this was going to cost, and it was my first time ever dealing with these cars mechanically and thinking that I was actually responsible for these things. So I asked, and I got a quote for what those would cost to replace, and it was actually pretty reasonable. But being new to it all, I had no idea how much it was going to cost and how long it would take to actually fix these things. The one question I remember asking after that following up was, would I be able to drive it for a while without doing this? As in, could I drive it for the next 2 weeks? And they said, yeah. It is also worth noting that most service centers, and especially dealerships, will give you a quote for how much it will cost to replace these things when they're doing the inspection. However, if they don't, make sure you get those quotes in writing, because this is going to come in very handy later. Once you have the inspection report and all of the quotes for all of the repairs that it might require, now it's time to really have fun with negotiations. One of the reasons you get an inspection is so that you can have the upper hand in further negotiations. While the house always wins, you can still at least get what you want at a fair price. Once you have a third-party perspective on the condition of the vehicle, you have the upper hand in negotiations because you know the physical condition of the components of the car. Right now, the average price for a used late model Range Rover, such as 2010 to 2012, is around $19,000 with average mileage and average condition with average spec. If you find one that's in perfect condition with very low mileage, you're going to pay a premium for it, but I would highly recommend buying that one with that premium price. Cars with a higher spec, such as an autobiography or a supercharged even, will typically have a higher sales price. Obviously that's all expected, which is why the average asking price is around $19,000. Now it's time for an example. So this could actually get really hard to follow, so if you lose track or need to see it visually, you can actually click a link down below and it will take you off to where you can see the example written out. So with that, we're looking at an average price of around $19,000 for the world's most average Range Rover. Obviously, we want to get that price down as low as possible, so here's what we can do. If the list price of said Range Rover was around $22,000, start negotiations slightly lower than what you're actually willing to pay. For example, knowing the average sales price is around $19,000, we're going to see if we can get the dealership to let it go for slightly less. With that though, I'd recommend starting around $17,000, but you can go more or less depending on your own negotiation style. You will though, and what's more important than anything here is being able to show and being willing to go up on price some, so that they at least know that you're willing to work with them on price. However, during all of this, be sure to mention that you will only be purchasing it if the inspection comes through and is acceptable to you. Otherwise, you're going to walk away. With that, you at least need to show that you're serious about buying it, and ways you can do this is by allowing the dealership to run your credit, as well as having proof of funds or income statements available when you're there at that time. When I bought mine in October 2016, it was originally listed at around $31,000. After watching it on that lot for about 3 months, I finally made an offer and got it for about $24,000. My original offer was about $22,000, which was about $2,500 less than what I was actually willing to pay for the car at that time. So really, I ended up getting it for about exactly what I wanted to pay by doing that. But the point of that story is this: let the car sit on the lot long enough to where the dealership is actually ready and willing to sell it for a fair price. Ideally though, the best thing you can do is work out a price before you have the inspection done. That way you can further negotiate on the price after you have the report and the quotes in hand. If you've already worked out the price that you're willing to purchase it for with the salesman, odds are when you get back with the inspection, they'll send you directly to the finance office so that they can close the deal straight away and not give you enough time to negotiate down from there. If that's the case, that's perfectly fine, because just because you're in the finance office doesn't mean negotiations are over, and they will still let you adjust the price from there. Likewise, if you're still working with the salesman after the inspection comes back, here's what you can do. Pull out the inspection report and go over with them the concerns about the car that you have and what will need to be done to get the car back into even fair condition. After all, if you're paying fair market value for the car should at least be in fair condition. If the report states that there's a blown front lower control arm or a small oil leak somewhere, or the air compressor is having trouble or a fault, then you can use these to negotiate down on the price based on the quotes that the dealership gave you. This can be done by negotiating with the dealership for them to pay for the repair after the car is purchased. Now, there is one downside to this. If you don't get it in writing, odds are it's not going to happen. So what typically happens more often than not is that they give you a credit off of the sales price back for that. This actually ends up working in your favor, because then you do not finance the cost of that repair later on. So if you're financing the car and then they take that off of the purchase price, that's, for example, $900 less on the financed value of the car. This works out in your favor because you're no longer paying interest on the repair that you had to do when you first bought the car, even after 4 years. For something simple like that, you can always have them take that amount off the price with the quote from the dealership, and then end up taking it to an independent mechanic or an independent specialist to do the work for a little bit less. That way you just save some additional money on that repair. Whatever you do though, no matter what, make sure that you have your agreement and everything you want out of it in writing before you sign on the line. The BMW 4 Series that we had a while back was inspected before we bought it and came back with a couple of things. One of them being that oil was leaking from a housing onto a belt, which needed to be replaced for about $900. Now, rather than having them do that repair, what we ended up doing was having them take that amount off of the purchase price, and then from there we were able to pay for the repair out of pocket, and that way we saved money on the purchase price and saved money on the payment itself. While it doesn't seem like a huge deal, in the end it ends up saving you quite a bit of money if you finance the car at an average interest rate. Obviously, we could go on for hours talking about different ways to negotiate the price down and get the best deal possible, but this was the best way to keep it simple and keep it easy for everyone if you're just buying your first car to understand. Everyone is completely different in the ways they negotiate, but the best thing you can do if you're a beginner is have evidence like a pre-purchase inspection and quotes to back up your thoughts and claims about the car itself so that you can work the price down with that. This can be especially true if the car has sat on their lot for example 90 days or 3 months, because at that point they're about to get rid of the car anyway and they would rather make money and just cut their losses on it. You buying the car, even if they don't make that much money from it, will at least free up their investment in it and allow them to bring in something else that they know they can sell quicker. So hopefully you enjoyed the series, and by all means, if you have anything that you think should be added to it, please add it in the comments below. The entire point is to help someone who's buying their first Land Rover or Range Rover who has really very little idea what they're doing. And I'm sure I've missed plenty of small things over the last few weeks, so by all means, if you can think of something, put it in the comments down below. Nevertheless, guys, thanks for watching the series. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, leave a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys in the next video.